The reason your characters feel flat is not because you haven't given them enough backstory. And it's definitely not because you haven't read enough craft books. And no, it's not because you need to add more quirks or more trauma or more snark to your characters. Your characters feel emotionally hollow because you're missing three specific things. And once I name them, you're going to feel it in your gut because you're going to recognize exactly what you've been doing wrong. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the right things that you've been doing, that the industry tells you to do, still aren't working, and what the actual foundation of a deeply felt, utterly compelling character looks like. Okay? So do me a favor and drop a yes in the comments if this has ever happened to you. You finish a scene, maybe a really big emotional scene, and you sit back and think, okay, that's solid. I got this. I nailed this scene. And technically, grammatically, you absolutely did. But then readers come back and tell you, I understood everything that was going on in the scene, but I just didn't feel that connected to it. And pretty soon, you kind of want to throw your computer out the window, right? Because you did everything you were supposed to do. You built the backstory. You gave your character flaws. You gave them a goal. You made the stakes high. You did all the things that the craft books told you to do. And still, the character is not resonating emotionally with your readers. Now, here's what I want you to hear, and I absolutely mean this. It's not because you're bad at writing characters or because your character just isn't good enough. And it's not because you don't understand people or humans, right? I talk to so many authors who are smart, committed, and just deeply in love with their stories, which is why they want to tell them. And they are all running into this exact same wall. So if this is you, you are not alone. It happens to most writers at the beginning. But, and here's the thing, this is very fixable. And once you understand what's causing it, it'll become very, very clear what you need to do to fix it. Okay, so let's talk about what's actually going on here. Because I've looked at this from every angle. As an author, as a coach, as someone who's read more books on human psychology than I would care to admit. And it always comes back to the same three missing pieces. The first problem is that you haven't defined your character's wound. This is not the same thing as backstory. While the wound can technically be called a part of the backstory, writing a backstory does not ensure that you've written a wound. I'm talking about something very, very traumatic that happened to them. The wound is a specific, deep psychological injury that then shaped how they see themselves and the world. So do you see the difference? Backstory is an event. A character wound is what that event broke inside of them, what gave rise to a limiting belief. Think about it this way. You can have two characters who both lost a parent as a child, right? But they may come out of that traumatic event in completely different ways because it's not so much about the loss, it's about what they took from the loss, the conclusions they drew from it. Okay, so a limiting belief like, I am unlovable or people always leave. That's the wound. And if you don't have this nailed down for your character, then their inner arc has no emotional anchor. Their reactions start to feel random. Their choices start to feel inconsistent because they are. Without that anchor to guide you, you're guessing. And because of that, your reader cannot emotionally attach to that character. All right, the second reason this isn't working is because you also haven't defined the limiting belief. The character wound we just talked about creates a story that character tells about themselves, about who they are, about what they deserve, and about what's possible for them. And that story, that limiting belief, becomes like an invisible lens through which your character sees everything that goes on in the plot. It's the reason they make the choices they make, even the self-destructive ones. Maybe especially the self-destructive ones. So have you ever read a book or seen a film where the character made some choice and a lot of the audience were going, what an idiot, why did they do that? Chances are the people telling the story did not bring across the limiting belief and the character wound well enough. If they had, it's not so much that anyone would have agreed with the choice, especially if it was destructive, but people would have at least understood where it was coming from. Readers want to feel that your character's choices are psychologically inevitable. Not necessarily logical, not necessarily smart, psychologically inevitable, meaning they go, of course he did that. Of course that's the choice she made. Because given what he or she believes about themselves and their world, it's only logical that they would make that choice. And when that understanding is missing, Readers might still like your character, but it's hard for them to connect emotionally to your character. It's hard for them to get on board with the story and with the choices that the character is making. Okay, so they have like a logical connection to what's going on in the story, but there's not any emotional resonance for them and that character. And that's when they're not going to be able to get behind the character. That's when the scene is going to feel flat and boring. And so if you're having the problem that I mentioned at the beginning, that is the gap you're living in. I would put money on it that that is the problem. Okay, the third reason that you're having this problem, and this is kind of the big one, although it does build on the first two we talked about, you haven't planned the transformation of your character. We are not talking about the plot arc here. We are not talking about the character's external goal or OOD, if you know what that is. I'm talking about their internal arc, the internal transformation. And what that is a specific shift from the limiting belief that came out of their character wound to something that is freer and truer, kind of letting go of that limiting belief in some way. And I want to be really clear here. We're not talking about just a lesson learned or a moral. We're talking about psychological transformation, going from a deep-rooted belief to a different belief. And it's not something that you can do lightly. You have to make sure that the character earns this transformation across the entire span of the story, or else it will feel cheap and convenient to the audience. And when that's not planned, when you haven't mapped your character's transformation, your character arc starts to feel forced. And believe me, your reader can feel that. It's like the character changed because the plot demanded it, not because the character did the work of internal and like spiritual transformation. And guys, the readers will feel that every time. Every time. They are very intelligent. They know what they're looking for in a story, and they want to connect emotionally. They may not be able to articulate what's wrong and why they weren't able to connect, but it's there. And this is such a big problem that I see for authors, because so often they really do, dump their heart and soul into their stories, and then they can't understand why the reader isn't resonating with it. This is why, because they've never been taught to do this. Doing the internal work for your characters is what makes readers latch onto them. And it's a little bit difficult to explain because it's not something that's tangible that I can say, oh, create this in your plot. Oh, let's do the hero's journey. Oh, let's make sure that we have some conflict. It's deeper than that. It's more detailed than that. But if you don't have it, your readers are going to have a really hard time getting behind your characters. Now, here's what I think is probably true of you, because I see this constantly. You have not been sitting on your hands. You've probably tried a few things to get your characters to resonate, to get your story written. Let me name a few of those. Maybe you've built a deep backstory, and we're talking going all the way back, childhood, family history, formative moments, right? You made a whole document, and your character still came across flat on the page. Maybe you've used personality systems to try and give them a specific personality. And I'm not going to lie, I actually really do like that approach for certain things about your character. It's actually very valuable, but it doesn't do anything for the transformation. It does help you to know how your character may react to certain things based on their personality, but it doesn't give you a character wound, it doesn't give you a limiting belief, and it certainly doesn't give you a transformation. Maybe you added more internal monologue, thinking that would help readers connect. But here's the thing, while internal dialogue is great, it still doesn't always do the trick if you don't have the transformation, the character wound, all of the things. Because then your character is telling your reader how they feel, which is good, but it's not telling you why they feel that way or what they need to do to fix it. Maybe you made the trauma darker. You thought, if I push the pain further, it'll feel deeper. But pain without the psychology, without the reader understanding why it's there, without the reader seeing the character fight against the very thing that will heal them, just feels heavy and like you're trying to force some sort of emotion. And the reader really isn't going to step into that with you unless you give them a reason to. Okay, then there's the quirks and the snark. There was a whole movement probably 10, 15 years ago about snarky characters, and people thought that this is what would make their readers latch onto the character. It was a trend and it worked for some people, but overall, making your character snarky is not going to make them lovable. And finally, a lot of people, in order to make their characters more interesting or more emotional will just raise the external stakes, meaning you throw in a plot twist or you make something more risky for them or something. And again, those can be great if used correctly, but again, that's not going to give you the internal transformation for the character. That's not going to make your readers latch onto them and connect with them emotionally. That's not going to help them feel like they're three-dimensional and realistic and jump off the page. You can have all of those things that I just named, and again, they're not bad in and of themselves, but if you're still missing that internal transformation, none of them are going to make your readers latch onto your characters and have a need to know what happens with them and how the story is going to end. Okay, so here's what's actually happening under the hood. And I want to give you this framework because it's going to reframe everything you do from here. Basically, you've been trying to build emotional depth for your character through information, activity, maybe complexity, more backstory, more quirks, more plot, more description, more internal thought, more, right? But here's what I want you to understand, and please lean in because I want you to take this away. It will change the way you write every character moving forward, okay? Emotional realism, which is what a reader will connect to, does not come from more information, okay? Emotional realism is what will make your reader genuinely feel haunted by your character, obsess over them, feel devastated when something happens to them. It's what will help your character live rent-free in your reader's heart and mind forever, or at least for a long time. And again, that doesn't come from giving them more information, more breakdowns where they cry, okay? That's not going to do it. That emotional realism comes from psychological truth. It comes from a core wound, a limiting belief that really kind of infects the way they see the world, and a transformation that is earned over the course of the story. Think of it like building a house. You can have the most gorgeous furniture, the most beautiful wallpaper, the most perfect lighting fixtures, but if you haven't poured the foundation, then the frame isn't load-bearing and it is not going to hold up. It's going to feel wrong and maybe unsteady to people who walk through it. And if they're not architects or builders, they may not be able to tell you why. They just know something's off. And that's what your readers are doing when they're going, I wasn't feeling it. I just couldn't connect with the character. They're basically walking through a house, which is your story, your character, that looks finished, but it's not structurally sound. So in this analogy, your character wound is your foundation, your limiting belief is your framework, and the transformation is the whole reason you're building the house at all. I want you to remember for a minute Vogler's definition of story. A story is a metaphor for a journey that leads to change. Everything in the story is fun. The world you're building for the story, all of the plot twists, everything that happens, but the whole point of the story is the transformation of the character. And if you don't have that, your story is going to fall flat every single time. And here's what nobody tells you. It's what nobody in our industry is talking about, but it will change the way you approach story and the way that you create your characters in the best way. And that is when you have these three things locked down, again, character wound, limiting belief, transformation, everything else becomes easier. Your character's voice clarifies. Their choices become psychologically inevitable, which makes the ending of the story feel like fate or destiny. Their arc feels earned. Scenes will stop dragging now because there's real human emotion and tension beneath them. And we're not talking about manufactured tension, actual human, messy tension that readers feel in their bodies because life is messy. Because here's what all the best characters in fiction have in common. Be they Harry Potter, Elizabeth Bennet, Katniss Everdeen, they all have wounds. They all have limiting beliefs that are born from those wounds. And they all go through transformations that cost them something and are often downright heartbreaking. We believe in them because we can feel the real raw psychological pain that they are going through as they transform. And when that's the case, your reader doesn't need to be able to name it. They don't need to be able to say, oh, I enjoyed this character wound and the way that the psychological transfer. No, they don't need to do that. Their resonating with it on an emotional level that they might not be able to put words to. They just know they love this character and they feel this story in their bones because there's so much raw psychological truth behind it. And keep in mind, this isn't something that you can only do with fantasy or dystopian. It does not matter what genre you write. It does not matter what tropes you are working with. This is true for all characters in all stories in all genres. Period. And I want to say one more thing before I wrap up, because I feel like there's something that a lot of writers feel, but don't necessarily say out loud. When your characters keep falling flat, no matter what you try, when you're doing everything right, but you keep getting this frustrating feedback, there's this quiet, kind of scary voice in the back of your mind that starts to ask, what if I'm just not good enough to write this character? What if I don't understand people well enough to do this? Why do other writers make this look so easy, but no matter what I do, I just can't seem to duplicate what they're doing for my character? So I want you to hear me when I say this. This voice is lying to you. The fact that you're watching this video, the fact that you care so much, the fact that you're still in the trenches trying to get your story written, trying to figure this out, okay? That is not the behavior of someone who doesn't understand people. It is not the behavior of someone who isn't intelligent enough to figure this out. That is simply the behavior of someone who is searching for how to get this done, and you've just never found the right framework before now. That's it. That's the whole problem. And once you have the right framework, it will become much easier. I mean, let's face it, you can't build the right thing with the wrong tools. It's just never going to work out for you. And most of the craft advice out there, the hero's journey, save the cat, they're great when it comes to the plot, but they are based on the external plot, okay? They have absolutely nothing to do with the character's internal arc. And if you're writing your story based on those, you are building the walls of your house before pouring the foundation. And that's why your story keeps falling down. So in the next video, which you can watch here, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to find your character's wound, not in a surface level way, but in a way that makes every single scene feel charged and alive. We're going to get into specific questions you need to answer, how to tell the difference between a real psychological wound and a surface level event, and more. So if you're really, really dedicated to making sure that you can write your character in a way that readers resonate, I hope you make sure and go watch this next video. And if you found this helpful, do me a favor and drop a comment. Tell me which of the 3 missing pieces I talked about is most relevant to where you're stuck right now. The wound, the limiting belief, or the transformation. I read every single comment, guys, okay? All right, that's it. I'll see you in that next video.